Hello, hello, hello. How are we, sir? Good evening to everyone, and welcome to another episode of Potstilled Live. I am delighted to be joined by Mr. Rob Caldwell. Good evening, sir.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I see you have a nice little collection of whiskeys and whiskey books behind you. You're all set up for tonight's show?
Yeah, I hit a few things. I mean, I carefully selected a couple of things. So, from Fionon's book and a bit of other bits and pieces. Some of the stuff we're going to be talking about tonight's sponsor, and obviously some Teeling. I've got to have some Teeling in there, I think.
Well, for everyone out there in the Facebook Live world that does not know who you are, sir, and why you have a lovely Australian accent, do tell us all about yourself and what you do in the Irish whiskey industry.
Of course. Yeah, so my name's Rob, and I'm currently the global ambassador for the Teeling Whiskey Company, a job I very much enjoy. But before that, was a bartender for my whole adult life, from 18 up until the old age I am now. Grew up in Australia, then traveled and worked in a lot of bars, whiskey bars and cocktail bars primarily. And yeah, moved to Ireland in about 2011 and fell in love with an Irish girl and an Irish whiskey, and now call Ireland home.
Wow, look at you. It's a you can make a movie out of that, Rob.
Yeah.
Well, I'm delighted to have you on the show this evening. As always, of all of our industry guests, you're here first and foremost as an industry professional rather than a brand representative. So I would look forward to picking your brain on the thoughts about the industry. Uniquely, I will be asking you about your brand tonight. I've never done that with a guest before, just because it's topical and in the news. So I thought no better person to actually tell us about it than yourself. Exactly. But just to give everyone a little lowdown on what's going on in the Potstilled Live world, we are back, having a lovely episode for you this evening. But there is a huge amount going on in the next few weeks. Next Thursday, Potstilled Live is back with a Cologne takeover. We are launching their newest 10-year-old bonded series, experimental series whiskey with a really cool new cast finish. We did do a giveaway for those of you who won the giveaways. We have a whiskey, a rum, and a new make Potstill, on the way to you. The week after that, we have, well, first of all, on the Thursday, doing a takeover with the guys from Irish Malt on 3 drams. So keep an eye out for that. Then the Friday, we're doing a special edition of Potstilled Live with a takeover from Dingle Whiskey, and they're launching their 4th edition Potstill the day before. So we'll be doing a deconstruction on that. And for people who've been on our Facebook page, we were doing a pun competition with Dingle that closed just about 1 hour ago. So it was best puns basically win, picked by the guys from Dingle. So they'll be tuning in a little bit later on and perhaps have some winners for us either by the end of the night or tomorrow morning. Those are 30 kits going out, 2 cast deconstruction samples, and a sample of their first ever cast strength Potstill, which I think is quite cool. And then we're back into the regular swing of Potstill Live episodes. Then we have a few people tuning in. Chris Hennessy giving us a bit of love from Kilkenny. He does say that your cook is almost as bold as the Teeling apron, so at least he's liking it. This is an important episode of Potstilled Live. We are back on the first day of the new lockdown season, so welcome back to the world of Zoom quizzes and people with their own hair. We do have people tuning in from all over the place. Gene, good evening to you. But yeah, I suppose the first and foremost thing we need to talk about is the sponsor of tonight's show. I don't know if you can see below me, above Rob, on the top over there. This is the Lambay Irish whiskey, particularly the Malt Irish whiskey for this evening, which is their, I think the name is actually brilliant. This is their blended malt Irish whiskey. It's called the Malt Irish whiskey because as per the Irish whiskey technical file, there is no category for blended malt, and it just falls under this weird malt classification.
So it's the malt.
Sorry?
So it's the malt.
Listen, exactly. Good evening to a few more of you guys here popping up on the screen. And of course, Eric back with a lovely Teeling Facebook photo in the background. He pops in every week. And then Laurie coming in Whiskey Chats Pod and Matt Healy over in the States. So this is the whiskey we are talking about this evening. As I said, there is no category for blended malt whiskies in Ireland, so it is malt whiskies. I think I'll just show you that one more time. Just here on the bottom, it's the camera's reversed. It's always a little bit tricky. Malt Irish whiskey from the guys at Lambay. I don't know, Rob, have you got some in your glass? I've had my glass here aerating for the last little while.
Yeah, I do, and I've kind of been picking at it since since we went live. It's helped ease the nerves, so I'm enjoying it already. Sorry, I'm a little ahead of you.
That's all right. I actually poured this earlier when we were speaking backstage, and I've let it kind of aerate away. And if anyone was watching the inaugural 3 Drams tasting, I got a kind of a sneak peek of this there. And one of the things I didn't do at the time, I kind of poured it straight into the glass and imbibed then. This has been sitting out for about 20 minutes, and the honey element in this has come out massively. Like, I had to pause and make sure I didn't randomly just have honey in my glass for some reason before I poured the whiskey in.
I'll tell you what, I was looking at the sheet you sent over and the recommended serve straight up with an added pinch of salt. I was like, man, I got to try that. So I actually have the 2 glasses right here. This one I added like a saline solution to, which is, just salts and water. And then I've got straight out of the bottle that's been sitting there since we were chatting earlier. Add the salt. It's this lovely kind of salted caramel, kind of what you're saying, but just to an nth degree. Really, really interesting. Lindt have these new salted caramel chocolates that it reminds me of. It's like this lovely salted caramel kind of creaminess. I mean, it's the first time I've seen a signature or recommended serve like that, and I'm down.
Yeah, it was funny actually. I saw the signature serve, and it definitely piqued my interest. But I only have like regular table salt, so I was feeling like that'd be a bit strange to just kind of pour in. I was thinking, something a little bit fancier on the sea salt end might have been, or if we're cocktail extraordinaires, you could have saline solution just lying around the house. But yeah, I don't know. Do you know much about the guys in Lambay? Because obviously they're one of the new indie, or I suppose not new, but newer indie brands, tied obviously to Camus Cognac in France, Lambay Island. Which, let me see if I can get this right. Anyway, it doesn't matter which way I'm pointing, but it's this window here. But it's quite a cool setup they've got with the guys over in Lambay. But the actual whiskey itself is quite unique in itself. But yeah, go ahead there, Rob.
I was going to say, this one, I don't know if you mentioned, but yeah, finished in cognac cask, and you mentioned Camus. It means, they're going to get some pretty high quality cognac cask. But I think the first time I heard of Lambay, wasn't it them that put a cask of whiskey onto a boat? And there was a big discussion around if that's not technically the island of Ireland, then it's not technically Irish whiskey, even though the international waters thing and all that exists and islands exist and things like that. But I think that's where they first came to my attention.
Well, it's probably why the technical files and whatnot, that was always one thing I was wondering about as well. It was probably why the technical file and likes have been updated to the geographic area of Ireland. Because probably like a few of the lads at distilleries out on the islands on the west coast are like, now. And then there was a question actually last week, which was, is Lambay the only island matured whiskey? And I was very quick. I was like, well, technically all Irish whiskey is island matured whiskey. But yeah, so I'm pretty sure they were probably exactly the reason that the technical file was updated, just to encapsulate all of the island areas around. But I think it's a really cool setup. The island itself, they've got an Atlantic warehouse on the island that they've converted basically RNLI old housing shed units. I think it's actually kind of a warehousing for the boats. They've knocked through all the walls and made into a kind of year-round climate stable warehouse, which I think is quite cool.
Have you been?
I have not been. I've cheekily dangled the request a couple of times. I was like, oh, geez, let's go see some whiskey and then also see some wallabies and some puffins because they've got some pretty unique wildlife out there.
Wallabies?
Yes, it's one of their.
There you go.
There's all manners of urban legends as to how the wallabies ended up on Lambay Island. But I remember listening to an interview between Sabine and Serge from the Irish Whiskey magazine, and I believe said that the wallabies were actually given as a gift how many number of years ago, and they're basically wild. Like there's wild deer on the island and a load of different. Like it's essentially a nature reserve. It's quite cool. But the actual whiskey itself, I don't know if you know much about it. It's minimum 3 different distillates. Triple and double distilled single malts, which I think is quite cool. Obviously, being a blended malt, they're coming from different distilleries, which is why we don't call it a single malt. It's 43%, so it's their first time going up to 43. As Sabine said last day on 3 drams, but they kind of basically listened to the market. People were calling for higher than 40 was the kind of claim, and this is their first foray into that. Decent price too, 50 quid recommended retail price. I'm pretty happy with that. I don't know what you're getting on the nose, but I'm taken back by it. Almost like initially like a kind of a lemon sherbet on the nose, a little something tropical fruits in the background, but the honey is all over the place for me on the palate. And I can see Jean saying here she added a bit of salt. It's a unique serve, absolutely.
Yeah, it's super different. It changes it completely. Like, a lot more tropical fruits, like you said, like passion fruit, like guava kind of, but adding the salt, a lot more kind of briny, caramel, a lot more of those kind of richness that you expect.
Yeah.
Like it's non-chill filtered, so it kind of has a nice mouthfeel to it without the salt, but adding the salt, it just layers. It's just everywhere. I like it.
I would love to have been in that meeting where they're like, you know what we're going to put on the signature serve? So, bear with me. Salt.
I can imagine an experience where you've had a really busy day. You cook yourself a steak. The whiskey's there ready to go. You grab the salts over the steak and it goes in the whiskey. You're like, oh, well, I'm not pouring that out. I'm going to drink it and taste it and go, we're on to something here, lads. Monday morning meeting, 9 a.m. I've got something.
See, actually, I had a similar conversation today, if I can be rude enough to pull out my phone while we're on air. Because it was a very similar conversation of you should have heard the meeting where this was pitched. And I don't know if you saw this, not whiskey related, but gin related. And this is gonna be weird if it can focus on my phone. The Drumshambo gunpowder, like lucky ceramic bottle, like that must have been, first of all, one of the coolest bottles I've ever seen anybody do. But can you imagine sitting in that meeting and PJ Rigney's like, I've got it. Just
those cats you see in Hangdai and places. Let's get one of them and fill it with gin. Yeah.
And the cat holding a little pot still. I think that's where that's the spout. I don't know if it is or not, but I saw that and I was like, God, that must have been the funniest. But as well, I'm sure someone was like, what if we did this? And they're like, genius. That's
yeah. Yeah. Remember when Tullamore Dew came in crock pots? How can we take that to a new level?
Exactly. But we are going to be talking about a load of things on the show this evening, all the while enjoying some beautiful Lambo whiskey. This one, as I said, all of their whiskeys are finished in cognac of some form. This whiskey is an average of 4 to 6 weeks in cognac, which I find amazing because they're very large casks, they're 600 liters, but there's still a good impact of the cognac on this for such a short finish, which I find very interesting. Some of the casks are matured in their cork warehouses and all bourbon, somewhere on Lambay, and then they marry them and finish them in the cognac cask. So it's quite an interesting whiskey, and we will be talking about it as we go through the show this evening. Excuse me. But we have lots of things to be talking about. You are going to be enjoying yourself with the salt. I'm now very annoyed that I didn't grab salt. And we, and as Jamie Cotter is just here saying, how many NPDs did they try to salt and they went with it? I don't know. I'm actually amazed by the salt thing, though.
It works.
One of the cool things, though, as well, for anyone listening who hasn't tried or perhaps has tried lambe, we have 2 of these single malt gift packs with some really cool bespoke lambe glasses in there as well. I will be giving these away on the social media channels for Potstilled probably tomorrow evening. So keep an eye out if you want to win yourself some whiskey. So that is a competition with Cologne done, competition with Dingle done, and now we're doing a competition with lambe. So it is all go for lockdown, I tell you what.
I'm going to have to give you some whiskey now, I think.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so I suppose first things first, why don't we jump into a little bit of teeling talk, because you are here. And as I said, it is quite unique for me to, I suppose, speak to my guests about their own work. But we'll get it out of the way because everyone, I think, wants to hear about the Black Pits. If you have the bottle, please do show it again.
Yeah, of course.
So as we go through all parts of the show here, guys, make sure to use the opportunities to ask questions in particular right now. But sir, the first own distilled Dublin peated single malt come out of, well, Dublin, but also Teeling Whiskey Company. I don't know if you saw in my kind of review of the product, I was actually in the distillery in 2015 for the Galway Bay kind of crossover stout cask releases, the 200 fathoms.
And that was distilling the malt, peated malt.
Exactly, yeah, which was quite cool. But yeah, tell us all about the Black Pits.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Dublin's first triple distilled peated single malts. Really exciting. The second release or second major release from Newmarket, from the Teeling Distillery. So really exciting. It's exciting for us to really start to integrate Dublin whiskies. We've changed our logo ever so slightly and changed our core kind of bottle design, put a little embossing of the Phoenix on, and it's really exciting to start to release that and invite people in and see how it's progressing. But yeah, it was a big one for us and exciting. Wasn't that many kind of peated malts. I'm guilty of it. When I first moved here, there was a cocktail menu when I first moved here that I wrote, there's no peated Irish whiskies out there. And I regret it to this day, especially now with so many of my friends kind of showing me their old menus going, you're a moron. But it's exciting, and taking kind of the lessons that we learned from the 21, the 24, the 28, and the kind of bit of the spotlight that they gave us. It's nice to, because they, the 24, a great example of a phenomenal whiskey that not many people get to try. This minimally peated kind of fruity explosion of apricot and smoke that is not that medicinal kind of peat smoke that we're thinking of from Islay. Much more kind of heather and Highland peat, indicative of what would have been Irish peat back in the day. But yeah, it's the 24, obviously a bit on the expensive side, and now completely sold out after winning the world's best single malt. So it's nice to have kind of the little brother in Black Pits kind of inspired by it. So it's triple distilled peated malt. It is fermented with a combination of distiller's yeast and white wine yeast. It's triple distilled. So as you know, peated malt, it's peated at 55 parts per million when we get it in, but every stage of the distillation process, you're going to lose a little bit of those phenols. So by the time it goes through triple distillation, we're down to about 15 parts per million, but we still have that vibrancy of esters from the yeast strain, the white wine yeast. So that kind of mixes together and really creates a unique peated Irish whiskey. Grilled pineapple, I think, was the first tasting note that Alex ever came up with when he tasted this. Kind of that idea of cast iron grill that's been used a couple of times. It's just burning hot, and then whacking pineapple on for some reason. But that was the first kind of taste now. But yeah, I mean, super exciting. 1/3 matured in Sauterne, that sweet style of wine that we know so well and works very well with Irish whiskey, and 2/3 in ex-bourbon casks. So allowing that peat to kind of come into its own and evolve. So yeah, really exciting. And, you know, hopefully that not only can bring people to the Irish whiskey category, but, you know, explore the whiskey category as a greater kind of category as well. Like a lot of people that I'm tasting on it, you know, they're not big peat fans, but are tasting this and going, okay, I'm not a big peat fan. I'm not a big peat fan, but I'm liking this, which is, you know, obviously great to hear.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw on the screen there, I brought up Brian Holland, my friend Frenchie, saying he's got a glass of Black Pits in front of him and he's a big fan. Robert in Sweden says he's a taster here for November 5th tasting. Should he be excited? I mean,
yeah,
Robert's going to say yes anyway. I think all whiskey tastings should be excited about it. Just depends if you're excited afterwards or not. But tell us, Rob, two things. RRP, and is it a part of the core range, or is it kind of seasonal, limited edition? What do we look, batch going, or?
Yeah, so it's €60 at the moment, available, you know, Celtic Whiskey Store and a few other places from the Teeling Distillery. Check out the online shop, and, you know, some really class off licenses as we kind of slowly grow it out. And yeah, to answer your second question, kind of a bit of both, in that, you know, as you know, you distill peated malt. It takes a while and a few runs for that to kind of peter out, for lack of a better term. So we only distill so much peated malt every year, and we have been doing since, you said, 2015. So we've put aside a certain amount, but, you know, it would be pointless to sell that all kind of immediately. So there's a certain amount every year as we slowly build up stock. So it'd be nice to see it sell out, obviously, but we don't want that. It's going to be a core release. It's going to be going to every international market. I think some of the bigger markets, it's going to take some time with COVID and things like that, like Germany and US will be looking later this year, maybe even early next year. You know, a little bit of trickiness currently. But yeah, I mean, a core release that will stick around for a long time. And yeah, hopefully it's as popular as some of our other releases.
Jamie Cotter is wondering what kind of expectations you can have for reaching Northern Ireland.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that one. I'd say it's soon. I mean, I'm certainly not going to suggest that you order from the distillery store or Celtic, but
beauty is so much more. You can buy 2 bottles for the duty we can pay here.
Yeah. I was actually talking to the UK today, but it just didn't come up. But I'm sure it's very soon. No, it's a lot of markets are already asking for it. Yeah, Hennessy, you said it, not me.
Dave Cummins he's loving the new look for the bottle of the Black Pits. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of half screen print, half label. Just on a side note, I think it's really cool. I like your little medallions, the triple distilled and the dub. Because actually, it's funny. Someone messaged me a while ago and was like, have Teeling not triple distilled this? Like, why haven't they said it on the label? And I had to like go and have like a virtual bottle like rotated to show it on the little medallion on the side. But yeah, it's cool. I like the half screen print, half label. I think it's cool. Especially kind of the bronzed foil you guys have gone for as well, rather than the kind of normal copper foil.
Yeah, I mean, it feels super premium. Like it's a slight variation of our Douglas bottle, which I'm not going to grab right now, but you can see, you know, the shape very well of the Teeling bottle. So it is a slight variation and adaptation of our Douglas bottle, but it is unique. And, you know, I really like the logo and everything. Like the, if you ever remember signage from the Black Pits area, I mean, a lot of your viewers are going to know the Black Pits area just behind the Liberties, you know, this famous area of Dublin known for tanneries and malting houses and blacksmiths and coopers and things like that. There was font in that area. You know, this is all inspired by the area. Jack's been, you know, very interested in the Black Pits area for a long period of time. So it's been in the I think it's been, you know, in the inner workings for a lot longer than we realize.
Eve, I was wondering how it's comparing to your Brabazon releases. If you can speak, I suppose they're somewhat different beasts, but if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, of course. Hey, Eve. I think you, as you know, the Brabazon releases tend to be skewing on the side of our more traditional flavors, being port and sherry influences with a certain kind of tealing effect. So I guess for those Scotch fans looking for those, especially your Scotch fan that like both Highland, Isla, Islands, Campbelltown, they probably see those similar flavors in Scotch and kind of gravitate towards it. Probably less so than, say, the really interesting and weird and wonderful fortified wine casks and even the more innovative collabs that we've done. So yeah, I think your traditional whiskey flavors fan can see and gravitate towards it. It has been as popular as Brabazon 3 so far. We'll just have to wait and see. I think Brabazon 3 is now sold out, which did phenomenal well. So we'll have to see what happens with Brabazon 4. Wait, I don't think I'm supposed to say
that. Well, lest we get you in trouble, I think we do need to move on. If you guys do have any questions, we can get back to them as we go through. So I suppose the next thing we wanted to talk about on the show is, and I mean this both jovially and in all seriousness, Bushmills did something, and it's like, I had, if anyone listens to Potstilled Radio, my podcast series, I had Seamus Lowry on from Bushmills, and he promised me that something was coming down the line and promised me that it was going at what he called Bushmills speed, which he said was slower than most. And I'm delighted to say, well, see, this thing is, we have this fucking monolith of a distillery up the north who are one of the most historic, probably the biggest stocks in the country, apart from Middleton and Potstilled and Grain. But and under Diageo, it just was kind of sad to see them. They tipped along, but and I don't mean this in a bad way. I just mean that it's a deadly fucking distillery, and now we're seeing some of the really cool stuff they've got in the warehouses. Let me just throw the ticker down at the bottom here. 2 new releases for Ireland. 2008 Muscatel, not Moscatel cask. We're going for different grapes here. Little Muscat grapes going on. And a 1995 Malaga cask, both at cask strengths. Not the first cask strengths they've ever done, but I think this millennium, I think it is. I remember the single cask Bushmills releases. Some of those were cask strength, and I'm sure someone will be able to tell me of some other regular Bushmills release that they brought at cask strength. But I'm delighted to see it. Jamie Cotter echoing Bushmills did something. I'm just going to say I love Bushmills. I'm just delighted to see that they're actively, like, the steamship collection for York was something, but it wasn't a mass market or out there something. So I think it's great. I don't know, what do you think of the Causeway collection?
Well, I mean, I didn't get to try it, but I'm really excited to see the return of premium single malts from Bushmills. I knew they were doing stuff like this. Like you mentioned, Seamus Lowry, he lovingly gave me a bottle of their Acacia Wood distillery exclusive to take to Russia with me, because I was doing a presentation on different wood styles in Irish whiskey. So I was presenting the chestnut single pot still from Middleton, the Acacia from Bushmills, and some Chinkapin from Teeling. So yeah, you knew that stuff was there, but it didn't seem to be the focus. So it's really nice to see a bit of a return to form. Bushmills 10, I remember when I first moved here, Bushmills 10 was kind of almost the Irish single malt. And I do have a story. I won't name names or drop anyone in it, but I remember going to a certain Irish pub and I wanted to broaden my horizons of an Irish coffee. I was like, I wonder if I can get like a really cool single malt. I'm always searching for the perfect single malt aged solely in virgin American oak. I know there are some examples out there, but I still haven't found my one. But at that time, I really loved Bushmills 10. So I was like, I'm going to get a Bushmills 10 Irish coffee. So I go to the bar. Can I please get an Irish coffee with Bushmills 10? And he looked at me confused and went, okay. And then when I went, sat down, and he brought over an Irish coffee and a Bushmills 10 and looked at me like, you didn't think I was going to put Bushmills 10 in this Irish coffee, did you? I was like, oh, okay, fine. But yeah, it was the kind of version for a lot of single malt. Like when I was doing a lot of learning around Irish, because I guess a lot of the information I had about whiskey was targeted Scotch. You know, I worked in a Scotch bar where I learned a lot about whiskey and was, you know, predominantly Scotch there. So when I came to Ireland, I needed to learn, you know, what the difference between Irish single malt and Scottish single malt was, and Bushmills 10 was always in every lesson.
Yeah, that, as you said, it was kind of, sorry, the dog came over looking for pets, so I had to pick her up. My apologies. This is Indy, for everyone that doesn't know. She's my little collie. But yeah, I've experienced a number of people who have done kind of the single malt Irish coffee idea. I still to this day protest that a sherry casked malt Irish coffee is awful. I've done it. I don't like I've made it myself, and other people have made it for me, and it's just not my thing. And same thing with sours. When you get into the kind of like heavy sherry, you get to kind of into kind of a weird space. But actually, we got a good question. Okay, we're leaving now. Bye bye, Indy.
Yeah, I don't need any more attention.
Yeah. Matt Kelleher actually asked, are the two new Bushmills technically non-age statements? That's actually a really good question. And then we're gonna technical file you for a second, because why not? So it says on the this bottle here, 1995, and technically, if they were selling this would be against technical file, but they're not selling it, so it's technically not. Because theoretically, they are actually in a degree, unless I haven't seen full-size bottles fully, unless it actually states the age on it, and if they have a casking date, they have to have the bottling date. So theoretically, it is a non-age statement whiskey just with a casking and bottling age on it. They can also put the age in numerics or words or whatever beside it if they want. But theoretically, it can be a 1995 non-age statement whiskey bottled in 2020.
Yeah,
and still technically a non-age statement. But
well, that's the thing. Yeah, the assumption is drawn that it's 2005 till when you open it, but you need to clarify. You know, yeah, when was it pulled out of cask? Was it pulled out in 1998, and then just sat on it? So yeah, you're dead right.
Yeah.
11 years in Oloroso and bourbon, 14 years in Malaga.
Yeah, I know that. Like both these sound great, and it's funny because in a way, I was talking to people about this. So like the 08 was 8 years in Oloroso and bourbon, and then 4 years in Muscatel, which is just as a finish, that's brilliant already. Excuse me. And then the Malaga. It's funny because in my head, the 08 seems older than 12 years, but the 95 seems less than 25. You know what I mean?
Well, there's another one too. So the 2008 has 1,454 bottles, but the 1995, there's apparently 2,491 bottles. So there is far more of the 95 Malaga than the 28 Muscatel.
Yeah. And I think Australia got a 2006 bottle. I could be incorrect on that one, but I know they got the Causeway in stores sooner than we did. But the actual bottles go on sale globally, like officially from literally today, which I thought was quite cool. Now, I know Irish Malts had pre-sales on, and I think they've sold out of the pre-sale for the 08 Muscatel, but they've still got the Malaga. So the Malaga, I think, is about 400 quid a bottle for a 25-year-old. And then the Muscatel is, I think, 100 quid. 12-year-old cask strength with a serious cask regimen. I think 100 quid's a pretty decent price on that. And then also, just as per our previous conversation, Jamie was asking about the bottles availability in Northern Ireland, and John Donovan from Irish Malt is saying that they've found a new courier for shipping in Northern Ireland who have much better rates and free shipping for orders over £100. So it's good to hear that they're getting on. And apparently there is a Bushmills Causeway tasting with Mulligan's next month, so that is super cool. But I am enjoying this as we go. Again, guys, remember that everything we're talking about this evening, feel free to ask questions at any point. We're happy to talk through them. I think, though, is probably a good moment to revisit our friends in Lambay, just because I've run out of whiskey in my glass. So,
yeah, that's a good reason. I need more whiskey. So
exactly.
The whiskey we've got.
Listen, we're revisiting the puffin in a little tuxedo, which I think is probably one of the more fun and more memorable, I suppose, mascots of the Irish whiskey industry. But as we said earlier, what we are talking about is the Malt Irish whiskey, which is their blended malt, which is a combination of 3 different single malts, all independently matured in bourbon and then finished in Camus cognac casks, 600 liters for 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the batches. But I'm interested. We talked about it a moment ago about how much the flavors opened up, leaving in the glass. But this is just straight in, so it changes quite a bit. And even now, knowing that their signature serve is the salt, I'm still kind of blown away. And now I really want it. But it's quite cool. I don't know. I'm gonna have a little sip. And if anyone else out there has a little bit of Lambay, do feel free to sip away and let us know your thoughts.
I guess with any kind of cognac cask whiskey, I always kind of expect a little bit of astringency. But I guess that's maybe my own prejudices around cognac. I always found I could, I love whiskey. I drank whiskey for years, and I could never get into cognac, and I couldn't figure out why. And yeah, I mean, with any cognac finishes, I do expect that astringency. And I found the same with the Revival 5 that we did. And Alex was explaining to me, why we chose brandy and cognac, and, the cognac that we got, the cognac cask that we got, a little bit heavier on the astringency than he would have previously liked. So went with the brandy cask. But this, very faint. And, I really like it.
I enjoy it. I think it's kind of cool that the way that they also cycle through the casks in between. So they have the maturation in Camus for the cognac, and they actually use kind of a range of different cognacs that they don't go all super old or all super young or whatever. They've kind of a mixture they work through, but then they basically send them for maturation in Ireland after they've been appropriately aged and seasoned in France. And then after they've kind of lived their lives maturing Irish whiskey, they get sent back to Camus to be essentially rejuvenated and used in brandy production.
That's cool. I
yeah.
like that. I wonder. It made me think of rum, like when I guess the rum industry, they don't really have that kind of back and forward. Because obviously you have, you're an Irish whiskey cask, but once it's had rum in it, it's pretty much always from then forward a rum cask. But I imagine, cognac cask can kind of go back and forward. And does it stay a cognac cask, or does it then become just a third fill or fourth fill, an inert cask? What do you call that? What do you call an ex-bourbon cask that's had Irish whiskey in it twice, cognac in it once, Irish whiskey in it again, and then back to brandy?
Well, I think when they get it for the brandy, they're rejuvenated. So I think they're shaving, toasting, and recharring then. So you're getting kind of a rejuvenated first fill cask almost. I think it's quite cool. As I said, 43% ABV. It's the 4th edition in their portfolio because they've got a kind of a beefy single malt out as well, a cask strength single malt as well. That I've had the privilege of taking a few samples of. And that what's quite kind of cool about that is it's one of those cask strengths that doesn't taste like you can sip and vibe on it kind of quite freely. There's a great cognac flavors imparted on it, but there's no big alcohol burn from it. You wouldn't in a blind tasting, you wouldn't suspect it was cask strength, which I think is quite cool. But I'm really enjoying this. This is a first time with a bottle of this in my possession to kind of tip away at freely. It's quite cool. I want to make it out to the island. I think their setup sounds pretty cool.
Do they have a visitor center experience on the island, or is it primarily focused on the production?
From what I understand, it's primarily focused on production and trade. They do have kind of a receiving kind of banqueting, or maybe not banqueting, but receiving areas within the actual domain in the actual island itself, because I think 6 or 7 people actually live on the island. So they do have kind of an ability to host kind of corporate guests and brand ambassadors and whatnot there, after seeing their kind of Atlantic cask rooms. But I think it's quite cool, especially the tie-in with Camu. That everything so far, at least, has had a cognac finish, and even sticking to a central theme, they're quite differentiated as well. And this at 50 quid sits in between the blend and their single malt currently. And I think like one of the things that they were talking about previously is the length of the maturation being kind of 4 to 6 weeks, short enough, but they were saying if they left it longer, they're getting very similar into the flavor profile of their single malts, which they wanted to kind of differentiate out of that. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. And actually, I believe their single malts are going the way of the dinosaur for many, same as many Irish independent brands. They couldn't source the same stocks, so instead of, I suppose, just putting new whiskey into the same bottle, they're kind of reinvigorating and re-releasing their single malts in the coming, I think, weeks or so, which will work perhaps in the maybe Q1 of next year. But
yeah, there's a few questions around that idea in the industry, I guess, is as we all start moving to our own distillate, should we rebrand, or should we just continue to trade on the good name? Like, does the average consumer really care, or do they just I think
the thing is, Lambay is pretty struck on being an independent bottler going forwards. Yeah. So they are working with finite stocks, but also they're working with new distilleries, and they're kind of laying down stocks in their own way. So they're kind of looking at it both ways. But I appreciate a brand that isn't trying to shoehorn, distillate A into the space that distillate B once had. But like you said, Rob, that the people whom have their own distilleries, at one point they said a lot of brands used to say like, oh, our distillery is going to produce a distillate that tastes just like this brand that we have. And at one point, every single brand on the island was buying from Cooley because that was the only place to buy from. And there was a danger at one point where suddenly we were going to have 34 distilleries that were making identical Cooley spirit because they wanted their spirit to taste like that. And I think with Lambay, it's quite cool being a pure independent bottler. They can kind of go their own way in what they're doing. And I can see that we have some messages coming in here that the cask strength single malt is on its way for early next year for Ireland, 57.5%, and even the exact cask numbers 4316. So I'm pretty happy to see that. Matt Healy is going back to work in Charleston. Don't go back to work. Just stay
call in sick.
See, he tunes in every week like a good lad, and has to go back to work midway through as well every week, which is it's 3:00 in the afternoon for him. So
lunch break.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also pretty sure he's got like one of those like impressive jobs, like a corporate lawyer or something. So, but he lives in Charleston, and if any of you have never been to Charleston, one of my favorite U.S. cities, it is pretty freaking cool. But yeah, I think I'm going to keep sipping on my my Lambay. Which glass do you have left, the non-salted or the salted one?
Both. I've got 3 glasses of whiskey in front of me. That's why I'm not sipping them. I'll go. I got the Black Pits. I've got the Lambay, and I've got the salted. and I've got a little bit of extra saline too. Do you want some?
Yeah, that would be great. Is that the one you just straw in a minute ago? Is this how you?
No, this is just regular water.
Okay, I thought you were just sipping on the saline.
Yeah, that's a little too Australian.
Yeah. There's a load of things we want to talk about, and I am conscious the time is kind of ticking along. And I'm going to drop into one here that I wanted to talk about. The Two Stacks Irish whiskey. The guys from the guys in Two Stacks. This is one of their first releases here. They release usually at a 46 and then blenders cut at cask strength. They've just released or just announced release of an apricot brandy cask and tawny port casks for their blenders cut. So at 63.7, I think. Very cool independent bottlers. There are the guys from Irish Craft Beverages, formerly Irish Craft Beers, who are investors and kind of co-partners in Cologne. So they're kind of a side. It's not Brendan from Cologne, but kind of some of his business associates trying to do what the kind of Caden heads of Scotland are doing for Irish whiskey. And I don't think I've ever seen apricot brandy cask in any whiskey style.
Yeah, I mean, there's a different style of apricot brandy. You've got two kind of different styles of apricot brandy, in that you've got obviously apricot brandy, which is distilled from fermented apricots, and then you have kind of the liqueur that's an eau de vie made from apricot flesh and kernels. But I'm assuming it's the former being barrel aged. But I think it's really interesting. You know, I'm looking forward to tasting it, to be honest. Really, really interesting. You know, one thing that we were talking about this beforehand that just kind of jumped in my head when doing a bit of research on it was, did you know that apricot stones contain cyanide?
I do not. As I said to you earlier, I know that apple pips contain hydrogen cyanide, but I assume that they're not making brandy out of.
I assume they're not either. But I just thought that was a really cool tidbit that I came across. Not one. I mean, I'm not going to be rushing into any fresh apricots anytime soon. Eating around the pip and then just throw it away real quick.
I imagine it won't be as poisonous as just licking it and getting some cyanide, but probably
not.
But yeah, so I know that we both wanted to talk about a few things as we're going along. One question I wanted to ask, because it's come up on Twitter and on Facebook there the last, I suppose, weeks or so, the discussion on E150A. And I know we're talking about this. For anyone out there who doesn't know what E150A is, E150A is an inert caramel color that is one of the only additives permitted in a number of different whiskey styles, but also in Irish whiskey, used to essentially alter the color of whiskeys to create consistency in color across batches. Whiskey is an agricultural product, and when you start putting it in barrels, you can have the exact same barrels and you pull them in 2 different months, and one can be rose and dark, and the other one can be light and straw colored. And a lot of large companies use it for the consistency, just to keep consumers happy. And then it was an interesting Twitter poll done there, and it was asking, should we get rid of it? Do you not care? Or if it's used, should it be put on the label? And I know anyone who's, I suppose if you're interested enough, you might know that in the German market, it actually requires the declaration of Mitzuckerkopf, or I don't speak German, so if you're butchering that. But it requires a declaration that there's caramel coloring in the bottle. So there's, I think, an interesting discussion to be had on that. I don't know your opinions. I think I don't mind it in use, but I would prefer to see it on the label. I know most indie brands now will tell you straight up that it's natural colors, but
I think, going back to your point, it was introduced for uniformity. Back, you think of brands like Johnny Walker and these big blending companies coming out of World War I and World War II. The idea of globalization, the idea of getting the exact same product across the world over was very innovative and very kind of forward thinking and groundbreaking. But that comes in, like that brings certain things in, like coloring for uniformity and chill filtration to ensure, the same liquid is going to every market despite their climate. Now we're starting to move away from that. You look at regular foods and no added sugar, big component of a lot of foods nowadays, sugar tax. So they kind of draw into this same discussion. But my opinion on it, I'm like you. I don't mind tealings. Don't add color to their whiskeys, and I tend to prefer whiskeys without color. But I don't think I could possibly tell blindfolded, in all 100% honesty. And I remember being in a chat with Alex Chasko, our master distiller, and the master distiller from another Scotch company, and they were talking about there is no right way or wrong way. But one point that stuck with me was this idea that with a chill filtered whiskey, there's certain kind of mouthfeel and fats and texture, more importantly, kind of stripped away from the whiskey, that the E150A replaces in a way. So that texture, it's not just coloring, it's not a sweetness, it's a texture that they're looking for that they're missing in chill filtration. I thought that was a really interesting concept that I hadn't heard before. So yeah, not just color, not just sugar as a kind of knee jerk, and yeah, apparently no right way or wrong way.
Yeah, and it's funny actually. Fionn O'Connor was once telling me that he found records from the early 1800s of lads down in Cork with like these great business ideas that they were going to add burnt sugar to whiskey and vodka and whatnot to make it look better. Which I remember him telling me that he never published to give people the idea that caramel should be in anything. So I'm glad I've just ousted him anyway. If you're listening, Fionn. But yeah, and it's funny as well because I think a lot of the brands you wouldn't expect caramel coloring to be in is, even if you've got that association with kind of caramel and premium or caramel and blends and whatnot. But it's one of those things that it said like it. Your point is to the bringing in kind of a viscosity or texture. Is actually one we were talking about this earlier. Is one I haven't heard before, but it's funny as well because I hear people complaining all the time about it, like sweetening whiskeys as well. And I don't know about you, but if either you could do it at home or if you've access to a distillery like we do, you could have access to caramel coloring. That burnt sugar is really bitter. Like it is not a sweet thing. Like you are burning the sweet, like it is burnt sugar. Like that is not a sweet or even overly that pleasant of a thing to taste. And if it affects the flavor of the whiskey, which it's designed to be inert and not do that, but if it does, it's definitely not putting onto the sweet spectrum, which I think is quite funny.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. But you got to think about how little goes into it as well. Like I'm guessing you've seen a whiskey being colored, but it is literally like the end of a pin or the end of a toothpick in a whole bottle of whiskey. I probably shouldn't use Lambay because it probably don't color, but it is literally just a pin drop of this coloring, and it just transforms the whole thing. So it's hard to say with absolute certainty that it changes the flavor, but I mean, again, like I can't speak with authority on this.
Of course. Well, let we keep moving on, just as we've so much to keep trying to cover. One thing I did want to say, one of the big things of the last couple weeks, Middleton Very Rare 2020 has been launched. The kind of the farewell of the Brian Nation stocks. It was released in a very well-produced Zoom call with Kevin O'Gorman and Dave McCabe down in Middleton. I have never seen this Zoom call. Was like the most. They had like multiple camera angles. They were swapping between them. They had visual readouts, questions from the audience. It was the most. And I mean, like, if they were going to do it for any brand, they were going to do it for Middleton Very Rare. But this was the most spectacular Zoom call I've ever seen. Anyway, nothing even about the whiskey. But I do have a wee sample of it here, the 2020 edition.
Nice.
Huge amount of information out there. I know it is, they said it's between 13 and 35 years old and leaning heavier on the Potstilled side of the inclusion, just because of Brian Nation's, I suppose, love for Potstilled. It is the main thing that he would be, I suppose, known for. And a heavier inclusion of rechar barrels. Now, I've had a little sample out of that bottle there earlier on, and there is kind of a nice, sweet American oak influence on that. And I think that even at the moment in Irish whiskey, something we're losing a little bit of is that influence of American oak. We're very heavily focused on finishes at the moment. And 3 years ago, I was complaining that everyone was in bourbon. So apparently I'm But as always, obviously the kind of creme de la creme of whiskey and in Irish whiskey globally, I suppose, and more as a market share and a prestige level rather than opinions. Your opinion can be whatever it is. Middleton Very Rare is still going to be probably the most giftable Irish whiskey there is.
I think that's the first gifted Irish whiskey I ever received that I didn't open, because I was always a big proponent. If someone gives me an Irish whiskey, I'll open it there and share. But I think the 2014 was the first whiskey I didn't open. It was signed by Brian Nation. It was the first one Brian Nation did. I think I still have it somewhere, but yeah, that was the first kind of premium Irish whiskey that I never opened, and now there's a lot.
Yeah, so I'm excited to get cracking into that. I will have a review up on potstilled.com very soon. Crawley Distillery, the second distillery to open in Donegal in the last 180 years. Quite a cool setup. I know, Rob, you really want to talk about this one, so fire away, man.
Well, no, I'm just excited. Like, just little things like direct fire stills. They're all cognac stills. They have a worm tub condenser instead of shell and tube. I think, it starts to veer us into that. We discussed this and we were, debating on whether we talk about geographical regionality in Irish whiskey. This is where it starts to happen, when you start to really kind of be differentiated in terms of distillation. Yes, there's big variance in casks, but I mean, anyone can, with a great amount of sourcing and some money can source the kind of cool casks that are out there in the world. But building a completely different distillery and distillation, I think that's where you start to kind of veer into they're doing something different in Donegal. So I'm really interested to try the distillate that comes out of Crawley.
Yeah, they're in an old, I think an old doll factory that was previously a textiles factory, which is quite cool. I know they've just been up and running. Obviously, Direct Fire themselves in Cologne are in good company there. And the guys over in Slieve League being the first distillery, I suppose, to open up and do whiskey distillations, who are focusing, I think, primarily or 100% on peated whiskey, which is quite cool. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with. I'd love to try some of their
lucky number 34.
Exactly, 34th distillery, GI verified distillery on the island of Ireland. Dundal's Palo Cortado 18-year-old single malt. I think this is the third, the third 18-year-old cask finish that they brought out. Cask strength, 54% alcohol, less than 320 bottles released. This I got to try a while ago. Myself and Jeff Spearin, who was formerly of the Dublin Liberties Distillery, now literally right this moment sitting on a tropical beach in the middle of Panama. I gave out to him earlier on. Ireland goes into level 5 lockdown. Jeff Spearin goes to a fucking paradise.
Yeah.
He moved from Dublin to Panama the week before lockdown and has been literally confined to his apartment for the last 9 months.
I wonder if he can spend more than an hour outside yet, though.
He can. Well, that's it. He's just got on holidays. They amazing. In Panama, they had days, specific gendered days. So men could only go down Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and women could only go out. No, it's the other way around, because his big thing was Saturdays were for the boys, and then Sundays nobody was let out. And if you were outside, you couldn't exercise. You'd be arrested for exercising, because you were expelling moisture and you could infect people. There was no alcohol sales, no tobacco sales. It was crazy. But anyway, this has nothing to do with Palo Cortado. Yes, the two of us actually traveled to Dunville's there at the end of last year. And I got a sneaky sample to try this in cask. We spent 3 years finishing in Palo Cortado casks. First of all, Dunville's are cool as shit. If any of you don't know or haven't tried any of the Dunville's whiskies, what are you doing?
The PX is phenomenal.
Exactly. Ecklandville have a few more Dunville's releases to come out, and then they're into their own age stocks. They've like secretly been distilling since 2013. So they've got some seriously cool undistilled stock coming out very soon. But this Palo Cortado, I don't know about you. I know you know your other spirits and fortified wines and whatnot. This is going to be a strange statement. My favorite sherry of the scale of sherries is absolutely Palo Cortado.
You're not alone. You're not alone in that fact. I think there's a lot of bartenders out there that's their favorite sherry. There is a little bit of buzz around the idea of Palo Cortado, and other brands, other whiskey brands have done Palo Cortado finishes. But it is a weird style of sherry. It's not something that just happens or you go out to make. It's kind of like you start with a Fino or a Amontillado sherry, and it at some point just decides to oxidize and become something else entirely. They call it the Amontillado of the nose, but the Oloroso of the mouth. It's very kind of unique and different. And as you know, like the sherry industry, not one to really kind of give away too many of their decent casks, especially as a rare occurrence as a Palo Cortado is. But yeah, as a sherry, fantastic drinking sherry.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. The kind of the oxidized sweetness of an Oloroso, but the dryness of it, you said an Amontillado or a Fino, and I think a Palo Cortado. I think I don't speak Spanish at all, but I had a cask. So working in distilleries, we get kind of cold calls from cask brokers all the time, and somebody had literally put their email into Google Translate in Spanish and translated it to English and sent it to me. And Palo Cortado, I think in Spanish is like pale sticks.
Cut stick.
Cut stick? Is that
cut stick?
So they sent me these emails promising me the best cut stick casks, and I was sitting there like laughing my ass. And then obviously like this is just a pure, like, I'm sure, like, for instance, I did a very similar thing. I went on an Asia work trip where I did Singapore, South Korea, and Japan over 2 months. And when I was going to Japan, I had my business card translated into Japanese professionally, right? Perfect. It was great. When I was going to Korea, I had somebody who I know who's first generation American Korean translated for me. And I was like, yeah, they'll do a good job. Sweet. So I'm on the plane, and coincidentally I ended up sitting beside somebody from the Irish consulate in Singapore, just going off to Korea. And they were like, oh, let's see your card. And they didn't speak Korean. So they were like, oh, so they called over an air hostess and they were air steward. And they were like, what does his card say? And they were like, Matt Healy. And I'm like, me. Perfect. Yeah. Keep going. And they were like, so my job is I do export sales. And they were like, you're a takeaway manager? You manage a takeaway?
I feel like you got stitched up there.
So I just had to scratch out a lot of and it was so funny. I just scratched out so many fucking the first word in all the business cards. And the Koreans were so polite that I just put one line through, and then they were like, they'd all look at it and they just go, oh, manager, yes, okay. And I'm like, you guys are so much more polite than the Irish. Like, we would have ripped you apart for that. But anyway, yeah, so cut sticks. But yeah, the Palo Cortado is is very much sold out. So I feel bad about saying it already. I think there may be one of those things where you see a couple bottles here or there or in different retailers, but mainly from the online stores, I think they were gone in about 8 minutes. Dunville's is very much a brand that has a very loyal following, and people pick these things up very quickly.
Well, they're not going away anytime soon either, with £9 million expansion planned for up there and down.
Yes, Invest NI has just put in quite a large sum of money into Dunville's, so looking forward to seeing what they come up with. I think we're running short on time, but one thing that you wanted to ask the people out there, so feel free to answer, guys, give us your thoughts. But Rob, one of the things you want to talk about is, should Irish whiskey have regional categories, and should we have a peated category? So what say you, my friend?
Well, I mean, we were talking about this beforehand, of like what are the kind of topics we could talk about, and I think that there's this huge explosion, and are we going to see regionality in Ireland? I perhaps don't think so, just given that there are distilleries across the whole island, and you've got single pot still producers down in Munster, and you've got single malt producers, you've got Waterford, and Dublin whiskies exploding, and urban distilleries exploding, and I am making tons of different whiskies now. The two in Donegal we talked about earlier, and they're not just sticking to one style yet. But I definitely think we're going to see a little bit more of an explosion into maybe styles. So probably not. They only make peated malt in, say, Waterford. Probably a poor example, but then maybe you'll start to see there's a lot more pot still coming from Kerry and Kinsale and Dingle and places like that. So who knows? I mean, maybe we'll find out in years to come, but it's hard to tell currently with such a rapid explosion and a lot of people finding their feet, finding what is their core expression. We were talking about this earlier. Should there or shouldn't there be peated whiskey? I'm 100% of the opinion that let's bring as many people to Irish whiskey as possible. That's literally my job. I used to get to go to America and they try these, Teeling single pot still is a great example where you meet all these different people and like, oh, this is so new and different and interesting. I love it. Like really excited because you're bringing people to the category, which means bringing money to the category, which means more explosion for the industry. But then, you come home and maybe it's not the same thing. So I think it's exciting to see this growth, but at what point would we then kind of bring it back into regionality? That it doesn't seem right now to be an easy transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Frenchie or Brian Holland's just dropped in saying regionality is possibilities, but would have to be managed correctly. Yeah. Whiskey is definite, though. I think that's one of the things as well about Scotch whiskey, that they've kind of got a regionality that seems to fit marketing purposes. But as you said to me off air earlier on, you get heavily peated whiskies in the mainland of Scotland, and you get light whiskies distilled in Islay as well. So, but
again, this evolved in a pre-globalization era. This evolved. This idea of regionality in Scotland evolved pre-internet, so it was already kind of in place. They used peat there, and they used oven kilns there, and that was just traditionality that had evolved over time and stayed distant. Nowadays, we'd have to make a concerted effort, and I don't think that people are going to, say if you wanted to distill, let's just call Dublin, for example, you wanted to distill single malt in Dublin, and then the other Dublin distillers went, no, this is only single malt in this regionality. Would you say, do one? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Only the finest of peated malt could be distilled in Dublin. Go away with your pot still. But yeah, I think perhaps more so, as you said, to the styles, and also the fact that peated whiskey doesn't have a category. We're kind of flip-flopping between styles and peated whiskey, but I think it's hilarious. If you look at bottles, most, I don't know about the black pits because I don't have one in front of me, but
I'll rectify that, I promise.
You can't, thank you. You can't have the words peated and Irish whiskey on the same line as per the current labeling guidelines in Irish whiskey. So you have to have peated on one line and then Irish whiskey on the next line.
Peated single malt under the Phoenix, and then down here it says single malt.
There you go. Because single malt's the category, single malt Irish whiskey is the other category. Irish whiskey is the category, but peated is like an adjective to the category. And I think the only people that have it the full line is Hinch, because they got approved by labeling standards in Northern Ireland rather than. So yeah, I don't know if that's going to change. Jamie is watching, so you can let me know if that changed. But I think they've flown under the radar with that one. But look, the technical file has many flaws, and seems it was designed to protect the Irish whiskey industry from those outside of Ireland making a fool of us, and now seems to be kind of strangleholding what we're supposed to be doing inside of Ireland. But hey, that's just my opinion.
Well, I think, I mean, I watched Jack on the Irish Whiskey Magazine podcast with Sergio there last night, and he brought up a good point. And like, you would have had to have a crystal ball years ago when they wrote this GI to see the explosion in the industry. It's happened so fast, so rapid, from in, let's say, 5 years, we've exploded from 6 distilleries, 7 distilleries to 34. So this explosion, it's nice to say, we're going to see this rapid explosion of Irish whiskey in the Irish whiskey category, but I think the explosion that we've seen is unprecedented.
I agree, and I think it's one of the annoying things as well that you're seeing. As I said, kind of a stranglehold. You're seeing things that are apparently immovable that seem to be quite movable in the grand scheme of things. So we'll see how it goes. But Jamie, they managed to get the peated malt passed fairly easily. That's good to know. But yeah,
sure.
But that's the thing is, I think there needs to be a bit of revision going on. Obviously, there's a number of things, and as I said, it's designed to protect us from outside, not to protect us from inside. And I think it's funny that even things that were pot still in the early 90s don't qualify as pot still today. No matter regardless, going back to the 70s, the 60s as well, but. And Jamie says there's 35 distilleries as of yesterday, according to the IWA. And he said perhaps there's a new one in Kerry, is it? I don't know. I didn't see an announcement of.
No, neither did I. And I was doing research today just to make sure my facts were right.
But hey, I don't mind that. There is a distillery in Clare that your focus is gone. It's good.
I'm just really drunk. It's fine.
That there's a few distilleries out there that are applying for GI status, which is what they have to get to technically make Irish whiskey, which is why they're not on the list yet. So perhaps there's a couple more out there that just need to be added to the list with GI status. But I think, Rob, that this is probably enough of your time I'm taking up, and everyone who's watching. You guys are fantastic to have joined in and for all of your comments. Do not forget that next week we have Cologne takeover of Potstilled on Thursday. So we're going to be talking through and launching, or I suppose pre-launching the next Cologne 10-year-old experimental bonded series whiskey. We'll also be tasting through the dark rum, Ireland's first dark rum, and then also a non-peated, non-GI Potstilled distillate, which is one of Brendan's, I think is for one of his few first non-peated, non-GI pot stills. And then the week after, we have a Dingle takeover with the new single pot still batch 4. And then, of course, a very, very big thank you to Lambay Malt Irish Whiskey. I think it'll be one of the few times you'll see Rob promoting other whiskeys. I don't know about you, Rob. I'm going to take a moment. I have very much enjoyed this. As you said earlier on, a blended malt or a vatted malt, but under Irish whiskey technical files, a malt whiskey, 3 different single malts, triple distilled, double distilled, all matured in bourbon, and then finished for 4 to 6 weeks in a 600-liter cognac cask, RRP 60 quid. I am very much enjoying this. There is a suggestion to eat some dark chocolate with it, and then also have the salt, which we've
try the salt. Yeah, try the salt.
I can't wait. What did you think? I
liked it. I enjoyed it. I 100% agreed with your honey on the saltless version. You know, like I said, I think I went in with my own preconceptions in terms of cognac and was more than pleasantly surprised. And then with the addition with salt, my mind was blown. So I want to try that with more whiskeys now.
Yeah. Well, I have very much enjoyed this. As always, if you're looking to pick up a bottle of whiskey, I know that they have this on Celtic Whiskey Shop, Irish Malts, Mulligan's, James Fox's, and all good, independent retailers. We are coming up to Christmas time, guys. Do keep an eye out. We'll have a kind of a Christmas list of good gifts for this year. But regardless of what you're buying, at least a message from me: try to buy Irish if possible, buy local. Amazon is the first lockdown, Jeff Bezos increased his wealth by like $4 billion US. So let's try to big up some of the Irish businesses that are out there, not just buying Irish whiskey, but buying Irish whiskey from good. And even if you're not in Ireland, if you're in Germany or the UK or whatever, you know, as I say, always try to buy local as well and big up the local businesses, because as we are now in level 5 lockdown, we're going to have, well, first of all, a lot more Potstilled live content, but we will also see a lot more businesses kind of closing, which is obviously not what you want to be seeing in this world. So keep an eye out. I've had a fantastic time with Lambay this evening. I think it's very cool. I am very much looking forward to seeing what their cask strength looks like in early next year. Cask, I think 4136, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken. But I appreciate it. We'll see you guys next week, and keep an eye on the Facebook and Twitter pages of Potstilled tomorrow, because one will be announcing the winners of our Dingle deconstruction kits, but 2, we'll also be giving away the Lambay single malt gift pack cases as well. We've got 2 of those going out. So if you want to win some whiskey, man, this is delicious. And if you have any more questions about Lambay, shoot them into the comments section. We'll be able to answer them along. And I know there's a few people from Lambay watching along as well, because, basically, I've had a great time. So hope you have too, Rob. Everyone else who's been watching, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And talk to you later. Slán.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. See you guys.